every aspiring soul is seeking for union with the nourishment that only the Spirit can provide. A sort of quest for the Holy Grail to transcend the physical and re-enter a paradisical state of consciousness. You may call it enlightenment, the golden moment of illumination, or the quest for the Holy Grail of your personal yearnings, among many other names.
And that was the inspiration for this new book. It was the realization that as we were trying to find out whether holy blood relics might truly take us to the experience of the mystery of Golgotha, it became evident that the quest for the Grail was, that we know from romance stories and the Arthurian legends and from history, was actually depicting what happened there on Mount Calvary. It was there that the spear stabbed the side of Christ for the blood. It was there that Longinus started his journey towards the Grail. It was there that Joseph of Arimathea had his fulfillment of the Grail, and it was there that the three Marys realized that it was the blood in the chalice that was the true Holy Grail.
This process is the physical signature of the cosmic descent of the human spirit. It is an ongoing process and must always be sought after, like the quest of the Grail Knights or the way of the early Christians. It takes an open, seeking soul that has purified itself beforehand to witness and participate in this wondrous process of human spiritual evolution.
And this we find as close as our own heart, our own blood. So when we see the mysteries of Calvary and the 12 stages of the Via Dolorosa, the way of suffering of Christ, it is also our way, and we do not need to go back to that time. It's in our heart, and we try to show you that this quest is what everyone is on, and it happens in your blood, where your consciousness becomes the result of all that you see and all that you think. And then that becomes nourishment for the Spirit in our blood. And that's why the Holy Blood relics and the Holy Grail, it was the substance, it was the blood, it was the consciousness of Christ that was the true Grail, not the chalice that held it or the spear that caused the blood to flow forth.
The blood of Jesus Christ becomes the ransom payment for the fall of humanity into this earthly world. Truly, the blood of God, through his only begotten Son, became the vehicle of redemption, as it was spilled into the earth itself through the passion and crucifixion of Jesus.
It was not long ago that the blood mysteries of sacrifice ruled all parts of the world, whether it was human sacrifice, animal sacrifice, but always blood sacrifice, and the blood sacrifice that comes with our own death and the way that blood was treated at the death of a person. So these blood mysteries are what led us to understand that there is a higher form of blood. And looking into the Greek mysteries, we found the ichor, I-C-H-O-R, the truly wonderful, enlivened blood of the gods that sometimes was shared with humans. For instance, with Zeus, when he had a child, Hercules, who then could take that blood, part human and part divine, and if he did the right things, 12 labors again, just as the 12 labors of Christ, the way of Christ. These labors, these 12 labors, are in fact what makes us immortal. Once we learn to conquer all of these ways of death, we find that we're immortal, and then we rise up into the sky, into the stars, just as Hercules did. So it is the blood of the gods that was shared on Calvary with all humans, with the earth, and all humans past, present, and future, all have in their heart now an enlivened form of blood that is the blood of the gods.
The Roman Catholic Church, much like the Romans before them, often amalgamated the beliefs of those who they conquered into their own pantheon of gods and goddesses. Jesus Christ, for the Romans, became the ultimate solar hero who fulfilled all prophecies and had the same characteristics of prior divine solar heroes.
The 27 solar heroes of the pagans before Christ, before the time of the Christians, were all seen clairvoyantly to be coming from the sun. They were mysteries of the vegetation and the solar mysteries that cause vegetation to be born, to die, and to be reborn again. And it was this type of preparation that could then understand that the propitiation of sacred blood could be that which gives life eternal, not only to humans, but to bring a new enlivening force to the earth. And these are exactly the mysteries of the Grail, that the Grail King would cause all of the land to blossom forth and to bring great bounty. It was the duty of the King of the Grail to oversee the bounty, and this is why the Grail itself is like a cornucopia, always giving forth, never ending, always overflowing with that which everyone needs to eat, to consume, to live, to find eternal life.
Jesus is the archetypal representative of humanity, and each seeking soul can identify with the suffering of what is called the 12 stages of the cross.
The Via Dolorosa and the suffering of Christ, from the crown of thorns and the scourging to the falls from the weight of the cross to the nails, to all of those things, the veil of Veronica that touched the blood of Christ, those are the holy blood relics. And when we looked closely at those relics, they are the same exact things that are referred to in all of the Grail mysteries, whether they be pre-Christian, Celtic, or Irish fairy tales, or the Mabinogian, or the 13th century stories of Arthur and the romances of Robert de Boron and Cretin de Troyes. All of these stories, if you look at them closely, are talking about blood, holy blood, and the consciousness that comes out of the substances that touch them. And so at the Last Supper, and from then on, the Holy Communion, the Holy Eucharist, uses a chalice with wine that becomes blood, uses a platter or a paten that holds the bread that becomes the body of the God. And usually in the Eastern Orthodox Church, there is a knife that is used to cut the bread, just as the spear cut and stabbed the side of Christ. The spear of Longinus, the spear that we believe then became the spear of Antioch.
When the Son of God, Jesus, offered his own blood and body as a sacrifice for the prior sin of humanity that was incurred in paradise that caused the fall, the turning point of human spiritual evolution tipped in favor of the Spirit.
And we noticed that the fall from heaven, Lucifer, Michael, Gabriel, and that falling down of the great dragon, pulling down 1/3 of humanity with it, with its great tail, was also like the fall from Eden. And we also noticed that there was a flaming sword and a spear that Michael used, both in the fall from heaven and the casting out of Lucifer from heaven, and also the sword that guarded the way to Eden, the sword that was flaming and looked in all directions. And we started to notice that these connections to the spear and the sword seemed to be one, and that then the Grail was held by the Archangel Gabriel as the lily, and that the blood is imaged in the rose and the thorn of the rose in the Archangel Michael. So then we see the Grail, we see in the lily, we see the spear and the sword in Michael, and what is in between, that sword that struck the crown jewel from Lucifer's crown, the green emerald that fell to the earth, was then carved into the bowl of Solomon that King Tyre had given him. So that became a physical object. But what does that really mean? What is the crown of Lucifer, and what is the stone that would be the most prominent stone on that crown, and why was it green? Why do these things give us an indication that it's the same pride that Lucifer had, that was the pride of Adam and Eve in the garden, that wished to become like unto God? Instead of just eating from the rest of the trees, they had to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and then they would become like unto the gods, and they would know the difference. That again is pride, and that was the fall. And then it's Michael who has to hold this sword of the spear to keep you from coming back until you're ready. And that's what we found then is actually happening in the human physical body also. And we found those analogies based upon the teachings of Rudolf Steiner and his anthroposophy. And then we found them physiologically, and we put them in our books, Tyla, as we did in the second volume of the trilogy of Sophia, the Gospel of Sophia.
Receiving this living blood is the spiritual inheritance needed to ascend back to the Garden of Paradise from whence we came.
And that's the secret of Rudolf Steiner's Mysteries of the Blood. The Grail is in your heart, and the Grail Castle is in your head. So you can see the procession of the Grail Castle in your head. But if you don't ask the right questions, if you don't drop down into your heart and have compassion, you're not going to get the mystery of the Grail. And so Rudolf Steiner tells us, and I'm working right now on a new article, to show that in perception, we have the nourishment that goes into our blood, and through the processes of salt, mercury, and sulfur, we have human consciousness actually looking out upon the world and bringing it into ourselves and using it as nutrition that then we offer up to the spiritual beings. And then they turn around and offer back to us what it is that we need as our nutrition here on this earth, which we've gone into great detail in our descriptions in Volume 2 of the Gospel of Sophia. But what we're talking about here is these images of the Grail, no matter what you consider the Grail to be, it's always going to come back to perception and how your concepts merge with your percepts, because that's how you're either going to get nutrition from the world and give nutrition to the world through your love or not.
The goal is always the same metaphorically. It is the attainment of the Holy Grail that feeds us the exact spiritual nourishment that we need to take the next step in our personal evolution.
And each person has to take the next step on their own. It's what we call the way, the truth, and the life that Jesus made reference to. The way is that path, the Via Dolorosus, the path of suffering, the 12 stages of the cross. And the truth and the life are what arise out of encountering the Grail. But at first, you have to go through the path. You have to create your own way up the mountain to the Grail at the top. And no two people go the same path, the way. No two people have the same suffering. And once you get to it, then we are all fed exactly what we need, the truth that we need, and we're given the life that is immortal from the Grail. And that is the secret of our blood. From perception and consciousness in this realm, we commune with beings in other realms through our blood, through our heart, and through that Grail of our heart, we are able then to transform what it is that we perceive, turn it into nourishment for ourselves, and then the spiritual world gives us abundant, overflowing love to give to everyone else that we encounter.
And even then, after beholding the Grail procession, the worthy Grail Knight might not have developed enough higher consciousness to understand what he has seen, and then ask the question, who does the Grail serve?
The path of Longinus is the path of a soldier to a believer. When he pierced the side of Christ and the water and the blood came flowing out and it struck his eyes, he went from being blind to seeing, and he proclaimed, "Yes, lo, behold, this is the Son of God." So he went from that point to not being a soldier, a centurion in the Roman army anymore. He turned in all of his equipment except the spear, and he became a follower. And he turned the spear over, of course, to the three Marys, to the mother of Jesus. And then from that point on, he was a defender, a guardian, a person on the path. He went through great suffering. And in the end, like John the Baptist, he was beheaded, which is one of the key secrets of the Grail and the Templar Knights. And Longinus then became the example of what was later to become St. George, St. Demetrius, St. Minos, these dozens of different soldiers of God who then become guardians of the holy blood. And when you then enter into the Grail Castle of the Head, or you seek it through the legends and the stories, it matters not. Find your own path. But once you do enter in, we were so amazed to find that the keepers of the Grail, in all cases, were female, and that there was always a Grail Queen, and she isn't wounded. And when the king is wounded, the queen steps forward and takes care of the entire kingdom. And even the Knights of the Round Table came from Guinevere's father, and they took their oath of fealty to Arthur, but they took their oath of chivalry to Guinevere. And when they went off in search of the Holy Grail, which some of them were pure enough to see when it came in the room and others weren't, it was to Guinevere that they were seeking the Grail. So we found that the Grail keepers, the Grail maidens, were female, and they had given up the paths of the soldier of God, of any war, fighting, killing, and became later guardians of the Grail. And then the keepers of the Grail are the ones who conduct the Grail procession, which tell the secrets of Christ and John the Baptist. And it is then only later that you ask the question appropriately, who does the Grail serve? And the answer is, it serves everyone. But first you must become the Grail King so that you can then serve everyone.
It is a slow and often difficult pilgrimage path back to paradise.
As the legends tell, when Seth went back to paradise, the footprints of Adam and Eve were easy to find because they were burnt into the stone. And when he got there, like many have tried to enter Eden, he was able to get by the cherubim, or the Archangel Michael, with the flaming sword that turned in all directions. He was able to get by it in some legends, and others he stood outside the garden, and the angel brought him the seeds from the fruit of the tree of life that had wound around the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But the path back to Eden is difficult. We know where we came from, but like the prodigal son, we forget how to go home, how to humble ourselves so that we can go back the path of being conscious of our own suffering, conscious of our own guilt, conscious of our own decisions of pride and the other 7 deadly sins. So once we find that path, it is a steep, steep road up that mountain. It's a 7-story mountain, a 7-stage mountain, and each stage can be marked by the 12 stages of the cross, or by looking at what it was that the soldiers of God endured, like Longinus, to become then guardians of the Grail.
This was the greatest pain and humiliation that a divine being could endure. To move so far back in spiritual evolution and unite with humanity's slow spiritual growth is the ultimate sacrifice of all times, the death of a God. Christ offered his blood body as the gift that keeps growing, like a grail overflowing with love and mercy.
Of course, this is the image of the Son, isn't it? And Christ is the second Logos, comes to our darkened earth at the time when it was becoming most calcified and hardened, and re-enlivened it with the blood and body of a God, of the Son, and made our earth into what will someday become a sun unto itself when it reunites with all the substance of our solar system. Rudolf Steiner tells us this, and he's one of the few who shows that it was the moment when Christ's blood entered into the earth that the earth then began to glow like a star, just like the human heart at that moment was given a drop of his etheric blood so that it could glow like a grail, like a sun,